Okay, let's get into it. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really critical question that sits right at the forefront of technology and medicine. How is artificial intelligence being explored to help doctors decide the very best treatments for cancer?
Mm,
It's a field that is just exploding with potential and, honestly, some really significant challenges, too.
absolutely. And to understand where things stand right now, we've done a deep dive into a comprehensive review article published in NEJM AI, that's the AI journal from the New England Journal of Medicine.
Right.
Our mission, really, is to extract the core insights from this source, what the experts think are the absolute most important takeaways about AI in cancer decision-making,
Yeah.
what's holding it back, and what needs to happen for it to truly make a difference.
And why is this dive important for you listening? Because whether you're tracking the AI revolution, following the future of healthcare, or simply curious about how technology could impact a disease that touches so many lives, well, understanding where AI stands right now in this high-stakes field is absolutely crucial.
Couldn't agree more.
So let's jump right in with the whirlwind progress we've seen in AI over the last decade.
Yeah, it's been really incredible. It's been fueled by major leaps in computing power, new algorithms, and crucially, the availability of massive data sets.
Right.
This combination led to significant breakthroughs, particularly in an area called deep learning.
And medical research has been quick to explore where deep learning can help. We've already seen systems showing promise in tasks like automatically classifying skin lesions from images, things like that.
Exactly. And then came large language models, or LLMs, like GPT-4, Claude, and MedPolM2. Their big trick is processing and understanding unstructured data.
Like all those detailed free text notes buried in a patient's electronic health record.
Exactly, which is where so much vital clinical information lives.
Yeah.
And when these advanced medical LLMs were tested on general medical knowledge questions, like those on the MedQA dataset, which is based on USMLE-style exams, they did quite well. MedPolM2, for instance, scored up to 86.5% accuracy.
Wow. That kind of performance on a benchmark like MedQA sounds impressive and, well, it is compared to previous AI models. But the source highlights a crucial point. General medical knowledge is one thing. Making complex decisions in a field like oncology is quite another.
Right, and here's where it gets really interesting. This review mentions a study that specifically tested several LLMs on over 2,000 questions just about oncology.
Okay, focused on cancer. And how did they do?
Well, GPT-4, which was the best performer among the LLMs tested, only achieved 68.7% accuracy.
Oof, that error rate is significant, right? Especially when you're talking about treatment decisions.
It's huge. The study found problems like the models being overconfident in incorrect answers, making things up entirely, what they call hallucinations,
Hallucinations, yeah.
and just providing inaccurate information. So while 68.7% might be okay for some, lower stakes tasks, in oncology, that level of error is a major, major concern.
Okay, so that gives us a snapshot of how LLMs handle oncology questions. Let's maybe shift gears to where AI seems to have made more tangible progress, cancer diagnosis.
Right. Getting the diagnosis right is obviously the absolute first step and fundamental for planning treatment. And AI is making real advances here, particularly in areas like radiology and pathology.
Exactly. Think about radiology, like reading mammograms for breast cancer screening. The source points to some compelling studies. A study in Hungary used AI as an additional reader alongside the doctors.
Like a second pair of eyes.
Sort of, yeah. And it actually led to more cancers being detected than when two doctors read the scans independently.
Wow. So it's not just matching human ability, it's potentially augmenting it.
Right. And another study in Sweden called Screen Trust CAD found that using AI to replace one of the two radiologists in a double reading workflow resulted in a 4% higher cancer detection rate.
Replacing one.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And workload, I imagine that's a big factor too.
Huge. A third Swedish study showed that by using AI to triage or prioritize the higher risk scans for radiologists to review first, they could maintain the same high level of performance as double reading, but slash the radiologist's workload dramatically by 44.3%. 44%, that's significant.
It really is. And we've seen similar promising results in lung cancer detection studies in the US and China too.
That sounds incredibly positive for radiologists and patients.
Hmm.
But the source keeps circling back to a key point about these diagnostic AI tools.
Yes, you picked up on that recurring theme. Despite these promising performance numbers in specific studies, the crucial next step, rigorous perspective, randomized clinical trials, or RCTs.
The gold standard.
Exactly. They're still largely needed to fully validate these findings in diverse real-world clinical settings before they are widely adopted.
And there's also the concern about dataset shift. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. Think of it like this. An AI model is trained on images from one hospital or region. Dataset shift is when you then try to use that model on images from a different hospital or population. And because the images might look slightly different, maybe due to scanner variations, patient demographics, things like that, the model's performance drops off. It doesn't generalize well.
Okay, so it works great where it learned, but not necessarily elsewhere.
Precisely. The source suggests foundation models might help with this. These are AI models trained on enormous, broadly diverse, unlabeled data sets, first like millions of different medical images. The idea is they learn a very general understanding.
Like a base layer of knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. Which then makes them better able to adapt or be fine-tuned to specific tasks, like detecting lung nodules, even if the data for that specific task comes from a different place.
Makes sense.
The source gives an example of a foundation model for cancer imaging biomarkers that showed incredibly robust performance over 0.95 AUC when fine-tuned for specific tasks.
And just quickly, AUC, that's a standard measure for how well a diagnostic test can distinguish between things like cancer versus no cancer.
Right.
Over 0.95 means it was performing very, very well at that distinction.
Spot on. Very high accuracy on its specific task after that fine-tuning.
Got it. So moving from images to pathology looking at tissue slides, AI is also making strides there as part of digital pathology.
Yep. Deep learning models have shown strong performance on analyzing scanned tissue slides. For prostate biopsies, the Paige digital pathology software showed 96.6% sensitivity, meaning it was very good at correctly identifying positive biopsies.
Pretty high number.
Very high. And automated systems have also achieved accuracy comparable to pathologists for tasks like Gleason grading, which assesses how aggressive prostate cancer looks under the microscope.
And I assume we see foundation models here too.
We do. Similar to radiology, pathology foundation models are showing high accuracy, even for diagnosing rare diseases.
Okay. And some of these have FDA clearance, right?
That's right. Some pathology AI systems have received FDA clearance. That's the Food and Drug Administration in the U.S. But again, the review article points out the familiar hurdle. Promising technical performance, even regulatory clearance, doesn't replace the need for prospective RCTs to assess how they actually perform and integrate in real clinical workflows. That integration piece remains a challenge.
Okay, so diagnosis seems more advanced, maybe closer, but still needs that real-world trial validation. Now, let's move to AI's role after diagnosis and staging treatment selection. This feels like the ultimate goal, but maybe with more significant hurdles.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. The source talks about AI's potential across the entire cancer continuum, theoretically.
Like where?
Well, in surgical oncology, for example, it might help with preoperative planning, maybe optimizing the surgical approach or predicting potential complications. During surgery, computer vision could potentially help surgeons in real time,
Oh.
maybe highlighting tumor margins or critical structures, especially in minimally invasive procedures where visualization is key.
That sounds like something out of science fiction, almost like augmented reality for the surgeon.
Right, the potential is huge,
Mm.
but the source quickly adds the necessary caveats. Implementation challenges, the need for really rigorous reliability assessment, and critically, the absolute need for prospective validation still needs proving out.
Same theme again.
Same theme. And similarly, in radiation oncology, AI could potentially transform planning, optimizing complex radiation beams to better target the tumor while sparing healthy tissue, maybe even reducing planning time.
Okay, but zooming in on the oncologist's core task, figuring out which treatment options are best for a specific patient. How might AI help there?
So AI research is exploring analyzing patients' unique molecular alterations, like specific gene mutations, to try and predict how they might respond to certain therapies, such as immunotherapies. But the source notes that very few of these predictive AI models are clinically ready yet. It's still mostly research.
But what about just applying the established guidelines? They're getting so complex.
That's another potential application. AI could assist by helping navigate the increasingly complex established treatment guidelines, like those from groups like NCCN in the US or ESMO in Europe. These guidelines are comprehensive, but they can be hard for a single clinician to keep up with for every single scenario.
Or maybe offer guidance when guidelines are less clear, like after multiple therapies fail.
Potentially, yes. Or a really practical use case could be helping identify eligible clinical trials for a patient. Given how many trials are out there, and how difficult it is to find the right fit sometimes.
That sounds incredibly useful.
Yeah, and maybe even helping manage predicted adverse events or side effects based on the treatment plan.
And these tasks, especially identifying treatment options and trial eligibility, heavily rely on understanding all the information in a patient's electronic health record, the EHR. So
Exactly.
much of which is that unstructured text like doctor's notes. This is exactly why people thought LLMs could be perfect for oncology if they can effectively process that messy data.
That was the hope. But the studies testing LLMs on actual, messy, real-world EHR data in oncology have shown they are not yet ready for direct use. For instance, one study tried using GPT-4 to extract specific clinical information from cancer progress notes and only achieved about 68% accuracy.
Huh. That's similar to the accuracy we saw with the oncology questions earlier, but for extracting real patient data, that seems insufficient.
It's concerning, yeah. Not reliable enough for clinical decisions based on that data.
Okay, what about when they give the LLMs more curated, cleaner patient data and ask for treatment recommendations based on guidelines? Does that work better?
The results there are quite mixed and often worrying. One study tested GPT 3.5's recommendations against NCCN guidelines and found 34.3% of recommendations were not concordant with the guidelines.
A third were wrong.
Essentially, yes. And 12.5% were outright hallucinations just made up.
Wow.
Another study found GPT 3.5 and Microsoft's Copilot were completely correct in only 36% of cases for treatment recommendations based on curated data and gave inaccurate or misleading information in 24%. They also found LLMs deviated substantially from expert recommendations in more advanced or complex cases.
Okay, so while the idea of AI helping with treatment sounds great, the actual performance on the core task of recommending therapy based on complex patient data, it just isn't there yet.
That's the core insight from these studies, yeah. The complexity and nuance of oncology data, combined with the absolute need for near-perfect accuracy, makes it a very different challenge than, say, generating text or summarizing simpler information.
Is there any silver lining there?
Well, the source does mention one study that showed more promise, where GPT 3.5 achieved 85.3% accuracy for primary treatment selection based on curated data. So performance can vary depending on the exact scenario and the quality of the data fed in.
Right. And you mentioned clinical trial matching earlier. That sounded more positive.
Yes. Here's where it gets particularly interesting.
Yeah.
And perhaps shows a more immediate path forward for LLM clinical trial matching.
Which is a huge problem, right? Getting patients onto trials.
It's a significant challenge in oncology. Only a small fraction of eligible patients actually enroll in trials, partly because identifying the right trial is so difficult and time-consuming for clinicians.
So how do LLMs do there?
Studies using LLMs specifically for matching patients to trials have shown much higher accuracy. One study mentioned, Ferber et al., achieved 92.7% accuracy using GPT-4 for trial eligibility screening based on patient data.
92.7%. That's much better. That really addresses a bottleneck in getting patients access to potentially better treatments.
It does. It seems like identifying patterns and eligibility criteria from complex texts is a task LLMs are better suited for right now compared to generating novel, highly accurate treatment recommendations from scratch.
But there are still hurdles.
Well, absolutely. The source notes that even with high accuracy, practical challenges remain, like seamlessly integrating this real-time trial matching into busy clinical workflows, maybe into multidisciplinary team meetings where many doctors discuss patient cases together. How do you make it work smoothly in practice?
Okay, so wrapping up the treatment selection piece, what's the overall takeaway from the source?
Well, the source concludes that for broad treatment selection based on complex patient data, the results currently lack the robustness needed for widespread clinical use. LLMs are definitely not ready for autonomous decision-making in this space.
But maybe as assistants.
Exactly. But they do show significant potential for assisting clinicians, maybe starting with tasks like clinical trial matching, similar to how imaging AI is starting out as an assistive tool, a second reader.
Okay, so we've charted the progress in AI, the promising steps in diagnosis, and the significant hurdles in treatment selection. This brings us to the critical challenges that are really limiting AI integration in oncology clinics today.
Right. To sum up the state of play, AI in diagnosis is more mature and, closer to clinical use, but treatment selection is still quite premature.
And the review reinforces a key limitation we've seen.
Yeah, AI systems, especially LLMs dealing with text, struggle with consistent adherence to complex guidelines and accurately interpreting the full, nuanced picture from diverse clinical data in EHRs. We just need better ways to process all those different medical documents and prompt the LLMs effectively.
And the source identifies a major hurdle that has come up repeatedly in our chat.
Yes, the big one. The striking lack of prospective, randomized clinical trials. Those rigorous studies that prove whether an AI tool actually provides real clinical utility and is safe in practice before it's widely adopted. We see them for drugs or devices, but very few for AI decision support in oncology.
Why is that so critical?
Because without them, you don't know if the AI actually helps patients, or if it might even cause harm or just waste resources without improving outcomes.
Okay. How are researchers trying to improve LMM output specifically for medical data? Are there technical fixes?
The source mentions techniques like retrieval augmented generation, or AG. Yeah. This is where you don't just rely on the LLM's pre-trained knowledge, which might be outdated or wrong. Instead, you give it access to authoritative external sources like the NCCN or ESMO treatment guidelines database, and tell it to retrieve and use that information to construct its answer.
Ah, so it's like giving the AI a stack of trusted medical textbooks and saying, check here first before you answer.
Precisely. It can help ground the responses in established knowledge and make them more trustworthy. And it can also help with explainability, potentially allowing clinicians to see which guideline the AI referenced.
That sounds really important for trust.
Absolutely. Example-based prompting, giving the AI specific examples of correct outputs, is another technique mentioned. But the review notes that the effectiveness of R and these other techniques in oncology, particularly with real-world, messy patient data, is still largely untested. It's promising, but needs more research.
What else is holding back accuracy and reliable performance? You mentioned data earlier.
Right. A critical factor is the sheer quality and quantity of oncology-specific data used to train these advanced LLMs. Most general LLMs are trained on the vast internet. For medical LLMs, it's often not transparent what specific medical data sets were used, where they came from, how they were curated.
So we don't know what they learned from.
Often not in detail. Or how different sources like academic articles versus patient notes versus guidelines were weighted. It's often unclear exactly which versions of clinical guidelines were incorporated, if any, and how they were balanced against potentially less reliable information the AI might have encountered elsewhere.
And fixing that data issue sounds incredibly complex.
It really is. Fine-tuning an existing LLM with high-quality oncology data requires massive computational resources. And just getting access to high-quality real-world data from EHRs faces huge barriers.
What?
Well, ensuring the data is accurate and complete. Dealing with the lack of standardization across different hospitals and systems, navigating patient privacy regulations like HIPAA or GDPR, and crucially, ensuring the data represents the true diversity of the patient population.
Right, avoiding bias.
Exactly. The source points out that there's a scarcity of large, publicly available, real-world oncology datasets that are truly comprehensive. Databases like Genie are exceptions, but even those have limitations for certain types of research or AI training.
And this lack of diverse real-world data also leads back to those concerns about bias, right? How the models perform across different groups of patients.
Precisely. Studies have revealed that these models can show unequal performance. For example, worse accuracy in scenarios involving female-predominant malignancies, or maybe exaggerating known differences in how common certain conditions are when generating examples.
So they could actually worsen existing disparities if we're not careful.
That's the risk. It highlights the absolute need for ongoing evaluation and mitigation strategies to ensure these tools don't inadvertently contribute to healthcare inequities.
Looking ahead, cancer treatment is getting even more complex, isn't it? With all the molecular data.
Absolutely. Interpreting gene mutations like BRCA, variants of unknown significance, mutational signatures, structural variants, it's a lot.
Too much for many clinicians to stay on top of.
Well, many clinicians may not have the specialized genomic knowledge needed to fully interpret this intricate molecular landscape and understand all its implications for treatment or clinical trials. AI models trained on massive data sets that include this kind of data could potentially bridge that gap.
How so?
By helping identify relevant molecular alterations, maybe understanding tumor heterogeneity, and suggesting personalized treatment options or trials based on this complex information that a human might miss or not fully grasp.
But again, it comes back to the data, right?
Always. The overarching problem for almost all these potential AI applications seems to be this lack of high-quality, standardized data needed for basic technical validation, ensuring the models are consistently accurate, reliable, robust, and generalize well to different patient populations. Many studies demonstrating AI potential still rely on limited or proprietary datasets, which makes it hard to judge true performance.
Okay, let's circle back to the RCTs, the trials. Why do you think there are so few for AI in oncology compared to, say, new cancer drugs? It seems like a major bottleneck.
The source brings up several viewpoints on this. One is that clinical investigators may just be unfamiliar or uncomfortable working with AI technologies. Integrating AI into a trial requires significant changes to establish clinical workflows, which is disruptive.
Logistics and inertia.
Partly. There's also often a lack of dedicated funding mechanisms specifically for AI clinical trials. And critically, the rapid pace of AI development is a real challenge. By the time a lengthy clinical trial is designed, approved, run, and analyzed, the AI model being tested might already be outdated.
So the target keeps moving.
Exactly. Makes it hard to justify a multi-year, multi-million-dollar trial for V1 when V3 is already out.
Okay, so given these significant challenges, data, validation, bias, workflow, funding, how do we actually move forward? How do we get AI from promising research to safe, effective tools in the clinic? The source lays out a strategic roadmap, doesn't it?
It does. And the central insight here is that we need to treat AI integration with the same rigor and systematic approach that we apply to developing new cancer therapies or complex medical devices.
Makes sense. What's the first step?
First, they say we absolutely need to develop robust multi-center data sets. These must be high-quality, diverse, include comprehensive longitudinal outcomes data, meaning tracking patients over time, and accurately reflect the messy reality of EHR data.
Which needs big support, right?
Definitely. Significant backing from government bodies like the NIH in the US or Europe's EC, or nonprofits like the AACR. And critically, these data sets must prioritize diverse patient representation from the start to help address those performance disparities and bias concerns we mentioned. Projects like Europe's UKIM imaging project are examples of this kind of effort.
Okay, better data. What's next?
Second, the focus should be on practical AI model development. Instead of trying to build AI that does everything, focus on specific, high-impact applications where AI can provide clear value, improving diagnosis accuracy in specific contexts, streamlining treatment planning for certain types of cancer, or maybe monitoring for adverse events earlier.
Start small, prove value.
Kind of. A phased, step-by-step integration approach, like how the Sepsis Watch early warning system was implemented at Duke University Hospital, is often more manageable and less risky than trying a big bang rollout.
Okay, and the human element.
Crucial. Third, we need dedicated research into workflow integration and human-AI collaboration. This is about figuring out the safest and most effective way for doctors and AI to actually work together day to day. What are the clear roles? How do you balance AI suggesting things with the doctor needing to retain oversight and make the final decision?
So how they interact.
Exactly. This requires research and, importantly, developing user-friendly interfaces that let oncologists actually understand why the AI is suggesting something. Explainability again.
Right. What else?
Fourth, leverage lessons from AI in medical imaging. AI in imaging started by assisting radiologists and is gradually moving towards more autonomy in specific well-defined tasks. We need similar focused funding from organizations like ARPAH or industry partners for oncology AI. Again, a constant refrain. AI models need explainable AI features so clinicians can build trust and actually adopt them. They need to see the AI's thinking process, not just a black box answer.
Makes sense. We need standards too, presumably.
Absolutely. Fifth, establish clear guidelines and benchmarks for evaluation. Professional societies like ASCO and ESMO, working with regulatory bodies like the FDA and EMA, need to lead in setting standardized metrics for technical performance, transparency, and clinical validation requirements.
So everyone is testing against the same bar.
Yes, and this includes ensuring evaluation datasets are diverse and reflect real-world populations, and establishing processes for ongoing monitoring and updating as models evolve.
Okay, that brings us back to the trials.
Sixth, and perhaps the most crucial point, incentivize prospective randomized clinical trials. The source strongly argues that AI decision support tools should be evaluated like new drugs or medical devices. They need robust clinical trial validation to prove they are safe and actually improve patient outcomes or streamline care in the real world compared to the current standard of care.
How do we make that happen?
Well, it needs support from industry and cooperative research groups. And crucially, the development of reimbursement models from payers like Medicare or European systems that are actually tied to the proven clinical utility of the AI tool. If there's no way to get paid for using it, adoption will lag.
Right. And the speed problem? AI moving too fast for trials.
They suggest exploring adaptive trial designs, which can be modified based on interim results, and using AI-driven analysis of large EHR datasets to potentially run more pragmatic real-world trials faster and more efficiently. And trials shouldn't just look at survival. They should also assess how AI impacts things like patient engagement and shared decision-making between doctor and patient.
Okay, collaboration seems key too.
Definitely. Seventh, foster interdisciplinary collaboration in education. This isn't just for AI developers. Oncologists, data scientists, ethicists, patients, and policymakers all need to work together. Integrating AI education into medical school and continuing medical education is also key to preparing current and future doctors.
And the legal side.
Eighth point, we need to address legal and liability considerations. Legal frameworks need to evolve. Who is accountable if an AI-assisted decision leads to an error, especially as systems become more autonomous? This impacts informed consent processes and the very definition of the standard of care in an AI-assisted world. Lots to figure out there.
Yeah, big questions. And finally,
Adopt a global perspective. Cancer is a worldwide challenge. AI solutions need to be adaptable, considering different healthcare systems and resource levels, including low and middle income settings. The course mentions AI for cervical cancer screening as an example where AI could help address shortages of skilled cytologists.
so potential for leapfrogging in some areas.
Potentially. But it requires international collaboration for global standards on data sharing, model validation, governance, and deployment. The source also notes, interestingly, that less stringent regulations in some settings may potentially allow for faster implementation and real-world testing, although this obviously needs to be balanced very carefully with safety and ethics.
Wow, that was a truly comprehensive deep dive into a complex topic. It's clear that AI in oncology decision-making holds, well, immense promise. But as this expert review lays out, it's a landscape with significant canyons to cross.
Definitely.
We've seen real progress, especially in diagnostics, and perhaps clinical trial matching seems promising, but substantial work is still needed, particularly in that rigorous validation through RCTs and addressing fundamental issues like data quality, representation, bias, and just basic integration into workflows.
Yeah, all those hurdles need to be cleared before AI can truly transform treatment selection broadly.
So, addressing the key actions identified in this source, the roadmap we just discussed, seems absolutely critical for bridging that gap between promising research results and reliable, safe clinical tools that can genuinely benefit patients worldwide.
It's the only way forward, really. A systematic, evidence-based approach.
It certainly gives you, the listener, a lot to think about. What does the future hold for this high-stakes collaboration between humans and AI in such a critical field? How will the roles of doctors and AI evolve together over the next decade? And what will that ultimately mean for you or someone you know receiving cancer care?
Yeah, those are the big questions to keep considering as this field continues its rapid advancement.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.